Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from around the world. My name is Richard Anderson, and I'm the founder and CEO of ShareVault. I would like to thank you for joining our webinar today. This is the 25th in ShareVault's webinar series, and today's topic is Essential Steps to Successful BioPharma Partnering. Today's presentation is especially timely given the rapid pace of innovation in the life science industry and the core strategic requirement which biotech companies have in seeking partnerships to advance their most promising drug candidates toward market readiness. At ShareVault, we frequently interact with growth-oriented innovators as they endeavor to develop an informed perspective on how both sides of a partnering discussion can efficiently exchange information which enables each party to gain a thorough understanding of synergies and upside potential while at the same time minimizing risk. ShareVault would like to thank our co-sponsors, Triangle Insights Group, the Licensing Executive Society, the Biotechnology Industry Organization, and all the bioregional affiliates for assisting us in driving awareness of our life science industry webinar series. I'll now turn things over to Steve Joseph, ShareVault's Vice President of Market Development, who will moderate today's session and introduce our speaker.
Richard, thank you for the introduction, and I'd also like to welcome all of our attendees today to what I'm sure will be a very interesting and useful session. Today's agenda has us spending most of the hour on Gautam's presentation, which will be followed by a Q&A session. But in between the two, while we're compiling audience questions, we'll briefly illustrate some of Gautam's discussion topics using a ShareVault system. In a moment, we'll get started, but first a few housekeeping items. Because of the number of attendees today, we are unable to accept questions orally. So instead, please submit your questions through the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel. Hopefully that's visible to you. Also, because this question comes up frequently, the slides from this webinar, as well as a recording, will be made available in the next few days. Okay. Now I'd like to welcome and introduce today's speaker, Gautam Aggarwal. As you can see from the slide, I think we're getting to the next slide. As you can see from the slide, Gautam's experience is extensive, encompassing large pharma and well-known consulting organizations, including Triangle Insights. And with his consulting practice, he provides strategic guidance to a variety of biopharmaceutical organizations. Today, at a very practical level, you'll get to see his experience and knowledge of the essential steps for a successful biopharma partnering activity. Gautam, thank you for being our guest presenter today. We're now ready and looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Richard, for the opportunity. And well, hello, everyone. Thanks for the time today. As mentioned, the focus of the conversation we're going to run through for about 30 minutes is thinking a little bit about what are the steps to biopharma partnering, and the focus is truly more on out licensing or being the seller, and what type of things should you be thinking about during that course. As mentioned, I am a part of Triangle Insights Group. I'm a partner there. I have been working with pharmaceutical clients for over a decade, helping them with commercial strategy and business development strategy. I welcome the opportunity to have this conversation. So in terms of the focus that we're going to have today is start off by looking at three key steps that we think are critical to preparing for partnering and eventually having a successful transaction. Number one is value determination. Understanding the value of the product or the products that you have is going to be critical to make sure that you have the right perspective. And here what we've seen often is that the companies that are developing products have very strong clinical backgrounds, but they may not necessarily focus as much time on understanding the commercial aspects of the product that they have. We think it's critical to understand that and be on the same playing ground with your partners in terms of the consideration of what the value of the product could be. Number two is alignment of expectations. This is actually more internal rather than external alignment. This is internal alignment between the board or whatever other stakeholders may exist within the company, having a perspective based on what the value of the product or products is. What is the expectation in terms of what the company may be able to receive in terms of fair share, and making sure that everyone's on the same page in terms of expectations for deal value are critical. And we often see companies have overtly optimistic perspectives, so making sure that that's aligned is important. And number three is ensuring that there is a robust partnering process that's built, and this needs to be built from the beginning, and having early conversations, making sure that there's a data room ready for conversations and for diligence by partners is all important. We'll dive into each one of these three topics in turn in subsequent slides. Number one, so for value determination, we, like I mentioned earlier, we do see several of our companies that we work with often don't really pay enough attention to really thinking about what the commercial value of the products that they're developing is. The focus, in many cases appropriately so, because they are working on some very important critical science, is making sure that the product that is being developed is strong, clinically valuable, and kind of goes through the different hurdles of preclinical and clinical testing. But ensuring that you have the right level of understanding about the commercial value, because eventually you possibly at least are going to be considering partnering discussions, is important. And what we typically recommend is, even if you are not thinking about commercializing the molecule by yourself, or that may never be part of the remit, understanding the market dynamics is important, because ultimately that will need to be communicated to partners, and being on the same page during those conversations is critical. So at a high level, we recommend these 4 steps to value determination. Number one is to think about the market size. What is the current market size, and how is the market size anticipated to evolve over the course of the next 10, 20 years when the product may be on the market? We also think, in addition to kind of the overall market, it's important to think about what are other products that are within the market today and possibly also in the future, and understanding what the target product profile is that the company may be working on. Understanding and creating that target product profile and having it be compared to the other products in the market currently and in the future. Ultimately, we recommend that there is some degree of market research that is done with stakeholders who may prescribe or pay for or use the product, patients, physicians, and payers, to understand what value could be realized. Finally, thinking about the revenue that the product could realize, but not only focusing on the revenue, but also thinking about the cost of getting that product to the market. How many reps are you going to need? What type of marketing budget are you going to need? All these decisions or all this thinking needs to happen early in the stage of development. This is not something that the company should be doing when the product is in phase 2, phase 3, but really the thinking should happen much earlier than that. What we'll do now is we'll turn into one of these these 4 topics one at a time and talk about them in a little bit more detail. And for each of these buckets, we'll talk about sources of information. How would you as a company possibly evaluate the market or the products that you're working on in more robustness? And also talk a little bit about typical mistakes that we've seen other companies make in the past. For market sizing, this truly starts off with an understanding of the disease epidemiology. What are the segments within the disease that are the most relevant? But disease epidemiology by itself is not enough. We need to understand the prevalence or the incidence of the disease and try to convert that into how many patients are diagnosed and how many patients are eventually treated. Because ultimately, treated patients are the ones that are going to be the most relevant. I'll speak to kind of a couple of the sources on the bottom left here that we typically have seen used and we feel are relevant for doing this type of analysis. There are lots of sources for epidemiology that exist, including kind of government sources, NHANES CDC, SEER for oncology, But from an access perspective, oftentimes, especially smaller companies, may often start off with looking at academic articles that talk about prevalence. Or there may be syndicated reports, third-party reports like Data Monitor, Physician Resources, that often cover the different markets, which are useful to have. Finally, even looking at analyst coverage for products that may be in the same competitive basket as the one that you're working on are important to consider, just to understand what are other people thinking about or saying regarding the epidemiology and the treatment numbers for this patient. One example I'll mention kind of on the right side here is lupus. We've done work in lupus in the past, and the epidemiology for lupus, and this actually exists for other diseases too, is quite varied. You'll see numbers anywhere from 100,000 patients who may have the disease to over 1 million patients who may have SLE or lupus. So oftentimes there are different sources that have vastly different numbers. And case example within lupus is Benlysta. When Benlysta came to market initially, analysts expected GSK and Human Genome Sciences to realize north of $2 billion in terms of peak revenue for the product, partially because of the disease epidemiology not being that well understood. The product has not performed to those expectations. Going back to the left-hand side a little bit and looking at units and volume, we have found other sources to try to get to now, moving away from epidemiology to treated patients, looking at data sources such as BioPharma or other syndicated reports, or ultimately IMS or Symphony Health type prescribing volume data is very important. Often we do see that especially smaller companies with limited budgets will often not rely on or not be able to buy some of these sources. We do think that you may even be able to get some of these sources through analyst reports or through other sources, which may not require huge investments, but it is important to understand how many patients are being treated in the markets that you're going after. I'll mention a couple of other mistakes on the right-hand side here. Starting off with the bottom one, confusion on pricing. We often have conversations with individuals. There are many different prices, whether you're talking about the US market or other markets. Products will have gross pricing, WAC pricing, and then ultimately what matters, net revenue or net pricing. And it's important to be able to differentiate between these and understand that there are sources which give you pricing, but understanding that for all of these, there may only be a share of that that's truly realized towards net revenue is important. Moving on to the second topic, competitive research and target product profiling. Oftentimes, companies may not pay enough attention to this as well. It is critical to ensure that you understand what you're going to be competing against, not only for products that are already on the market, but for products that may be in development, whether it's late stage or earlier stage development. And then doing the analysis or thinking about how does your product compare to other products, whether it be on efficacy, tolerability, convenience, or other features, is important. Ultimately, you need to be able to define what truly is differentiating for the product that you're working on. And it shouldn't just be a, here's the positives. In most cases, there are some drawbacks as well. So thinking about the shortcomings in an honest manner along with the upside is important. In terms of information sources here, we typically recommend and use ourselves sources such as package inserts for products that are already in the market, looking at drugs at FDA or other FDA websites to see what's been approved. In addition to that, for pipeline products, looking at clinicaltrials.gov or pipeline databases such as BioPharma, Pharma Projects, or Biomed Tracker are all useful. Ultimately here, and as I'm sure a lot of smaller companies do, they have a good network with KOLs within the field. Having conversations with those individuals to think about how the products stack up compared to each other is critical. In terms of thinking about typical mistakes that we've seen for companies within this realm, I'll start off with the bottom with the ProVenge case study. ProVenge, when it came out, was considered to be, or when it was in development, was considered to be a game changer, something which, though quite a complex product, could confer significant value to patients. But what happened with that product, in addition to the complexity and the price of the product and the coverage, there were challenges from competing products, competing oral products that were much easier to use and had relatively effective outcomes as well. So part of what happened with ProVenge, we feel, was that there was not enough focus paid on what is happening with the rest of the market. In addition to that, we often see companies really think about an optimistic perspective in terms of what may happen with the product as it continues in development. We think it's important to consider not only the upside, but to think about things in a realistic manner and even consider some downsides in terms of what may happen in your phase 2 study or earlier, or what do you expect the outcomes of your phase 3 study to be, to ensure that there's appropriate characterization of the overall value that the product may provide across different assumptions. In addition to that, closing the loop, we do feel that as the company is thinking about the commercial value of a particular product, it's important to take those learnings and put those back into the product development plan. Understanding how the commercial focus will eventually influence the studies that they need to be run is important. Ultimately, it is a loop, and you need to be able to define the right product, and part of that will require running the right studies with the right endpoints and eventually the right claims that you can make to the market. Moving to the next topic, market research and TPP testing. So part of what we see sometimes is companies may not necessarily even have a target product profile built for what they're working on. We recommend that a target product profile should be built even before you start studies in man. There should be a perspective as to what exactly you think the product may be able to deliver, even when you're in preclinical or in early development. And then taking that target product profile and conducting market research to understand how could a product like this perform is important, and eventually that results back in that loop closure that we talked about in the previous slide. Understanding how the product profile fits needs and how you may need to have different endpoints is important. And in terms of the market research, we ultimately think, speaking to the different stakeholders from a US perspective, not only speaking to KOLs, but thinking about community physicians and patients and payers, and maybe different types of payers, can be important. From an information source perspective, this goes back to understanding prescriber level data from sources such as IMS or Wolters Kluwer's Symphony Health, to understand who are the current prescribers. Is a product that you're working on, is it a primary care product or is it a specialty product? How many physicians possibly will be prescribing this once a product does hopefully reach market? Understanding for other products in the market, how have they been adopted by different physician specialties? What pricing has been used for these products is important as well. From a market research perspective, often we will start off or recommend having qualitative market research discussions, whether they be focus groups, in-person discussions, or teledeath interviews. But often we will also recommend, as a product gets closer to market, to think about quantitative market research, thinking about having internet surveys with those different stakeholders. In terms of the mistakes here, we feel that oftentimes companies may think about this, especially some of the smaller ones, may think about doing market research once a product comes to phase 2 or even phase 3, rather than evaluating the commercial potential a little bit earlier. We think having some perspective on this in an iterative and a more robust way as a product gets to market or gets closer to market is important. And also that over reliance on KOLs. KOLs, at least, kind of your KOLs, can often be relatively optimistic. So making sure that you get a more comprehensive perspective of why the product is important. And thinking about pricing. We'll talk a little bit more about this in the next slide. But thinking about pricing in terms of, yes, the US is a free market pricing. You can price wherever you want to a certain extent, versus the mindset of, depending on the price that you do go with, there may be significant controls that payers put on, and they may have significant desire to make sure that you don't get used as much, or do a prior authorization or exemptions, or increase the copay that the patient would have to pay to ensure that the product does not get utilized too much. So the payer research and thinking about pricing and thinking about the pricing strategy is critical. And then finally, we often get asked this question in terms of how do we incorporate market research into thinking. Physicians may sometimes still be relatively optimistic. There is oftentimes a market research haircut that's deployed, thinking about what that market research haircut should be. And there is no one way of doing it, but thinking about what makes the most sense for the product that you're working on. How do you incorporate what you hear into consideration for the future is important. A lot of companies, when they're thinking about market research, will often take what they hear and cut it by half, or even cut it by 75%. So understanding what to do is important. The final step is to take a look at the previous learnings, how big the market is, what the reaction of different stakeholders is, and to start to think about what the revenue and eventually net present value for the product could be. Here, it's important to think about revenue and how fast it gets there. Typically, what is the uptake curve? How long does it take most molecules to get to peak sales? Understanding that those first few years can be critical for a valuation model. Thinking about the costs, and for the costs, it's not just the R&D costs, but it should also be the costs related to commercialization. How many reps are required? What type of marketing budget is envisioned? What type of direct-to-consumer budget should be assumed for a product like this? There's a whole host of costs that could be required, and having a perspective on that, even as an out-licenser, is important to make sure that you are thinking along the same lines as your potential future partner. And then thinking about things like discount rate. For discount rate, and I'll talk about some of the typical mistakes, oftentimes we see companies use extremely high discount rates to reflect the risk that's embedded within product development. We recommend, and we think best practices are to not mix discount rates and risk adjustment. There should be two separate adjustments, one for discount rate, which is essentially reflects the cost of capital, plus some, and then a risk adjustment, which is a separate adjustment. If you bake those in together, that can significantly adversely impact your forecasting or your net present value. Thinking about taxes and cash flow for the product and what type of assumption should you make is also important. Finally, the next step, value share. So you may have a perspective of you have a product that may hit $1 billion in peak sales, has a lot of IP associated with it, and you're already in phase 2, but what share of that value could you retain if you do out-license it at the end of phase 2? Well, what typically happens? What deal structure could you envision? It's important to be able to have a perspective on that and to be informed based on analogs or benchmarks that you see within the market. And for that, there are sources out there that capture deal transactions that take place. A lot of times those deal terms are not disclosed, but there are pieces of those deals structures that are disclosed, and capturing those and understanding what that may mean for your product is important. Looking at some of the information sources in the bottom, from a revenue perspective, it's important to think about your EPI model, your financial model. How exactly are you going to be forecasting? Forecasting can be done from an epidemiology perspective or a prescription model perspective. You may need to think about, is this a chronic model or is this a model that's only for acute patients? We have seen in the past where companies may think that all patients may be treated, even though in reality, the numbers that should be baked into a revenue forecast model are the patients who are new every year, not necessarily the patients who've had the disease for 10 years. From a cost perspective, there are benchmarks that you can understand from subject matter experts. Take a look at analog companies to see what they're doing in terms of number of reps or marketing budgets. You can talk to the CROs for R&D related budgets, or look at industry standards. For discount rates, typically what we see nowadays is discount rates in the 10 to 12% range. Most companies, larger companies, may be closer to the 10%. The smaller companies may be closer to 11 to 12%. And depending on where your cash is coming from, Japanese companies, as an example, may even be lower than 10%. Thinking about some of the mistakes in a bit more detail, I mentioned the mixing of the discount rates and risk adjustment. We do often see companies use discount rates of 20, 25, 30% and not do a risk adjustment, and we think that is not appropriate forecasting and will actually devalue your product if you look at it that way. We talked a little bit about prevalence modeling or incidence modeling, and the fifth one, being too afraid to call your kid ugly. I think understanding what your product is and making sure you have an internal perspective. There may be upsides that you run, especially as you have partnering conversations, but making sure that you have a good perspective on what can go wrong or what the downsides are is important to model. There should not just be a base case model. There should be other assumptions that may depend on what other products get to market. What if the pricing pressure is higher than you expect? Not triangulating between epidemiology and TRX models. Recently we're working on a project where we were looking at a market, and the epidemiology for the market was around 10 million patients. And the modeling that was done suggested that let's start off with those 10 million patients and what share of those patients could get treated based on market research. But when you looked at the current market and what products were being used, only a fraction of the patients were actually being treated. So understanding that not every patient that exists may get treated for various reasons because of severity of disease or other factors is important. So being able to triangulate between the EPI model and the TRX model is something that we typically recommend that companies take a look at. And then finally, we talked a little bit about value share. Oftentimes, companies don't necessarily have a good perspective of, given that your product is in has completed phase 2, is running a phase 3 study, what share of the value should come to you? What is normal? The industry benchmarks for this are not necessarily clearly available in the public domain, so it's important to make sure that you look at some of the data that does exist, have conversations with subject matter experts to understand what is realistic and have realistic expectations. So moving to the second topic, we talked a little bit about understanding what the value of the product or products you're working on is. The second topic is trying to understand and aligning expectations. So the first topic was more an external overall assessment of value. The perspective here that we wanted to discuss is trying to make sure that there's alignment internally in terms of what the value is and what share of that value could be realized by the out-licensor. So the schematic on the left, what we trying to frame there is the internal perspective, and depending on the deal you get, you may end up getting kind of the circle red deal or the green diamond deal in terms of value. And that could be the internal base case perspective, and we'll make up numbers, and let's say that's an assumption that the value could be between 80 and 120 million internally. But when you are having conversations with partners, partners may have a more optimistic perspective or a more pessimistic perspective in terms of what their view of the product is. That perspective could be influenced by their perspective on risk. Their perspective on risk possibly could be lower or higher than the perspective that the management has. So understanding not only from your perspective, but from the potential partner's perspective in terms of what do they think the value of the product is important. It's also, in some cases, the risk rate, the discount rate for the partner could be different. If they're a large pharma partner, it's quite possible that their risk rate is different than yours. In addition to that, if they already have a sales force calling on the groups that you would be calling upon, the cost that they would have to commercialize could be different than the cost you have. So the value does depend upon who has the asset. So understanding the value perspective that the partner has is important. In addition to that, there are the difference between the red circle and the green diamonds. There are different deals. There's good deals and bad deals, and in between that is typically what happens in terms of value share, making sure that you understand what that typical range is and what defines a good deal and what defines a bad deal is important, and having that common perspective within the management team of here's what we're expecting to receive, given deal analogs, given the product's value is important. Looking at the bottom right here, it's also critical to understand just the timing behind getting a transaction done. Transactions, and it depends on the molecule and the market that you're going after and what you've done prior to really starting on a partnering program. But a partnering program could take anywhere from 6 months to 18 months, possibly even longer. Having kind of aligned expectations around timing in addition to value is important. And then it can also the structure of the deal. On the left-hand side here, we simplified value. Value has components of upfront value, then milestones and royalties, and other components of deal structuring can be embedded. Making sure that the management team has a perspective of what they're looking for each of those levers is important. Moving on to the third topic. So we talked a little bit about value. How do you determine value? And how do you ensure that internally you're aligned in terms of what share of that value you may realize if you do a partnering program? Slide 12 then focuses on thinking about what are the essential steps to having a successful partnering program. We think, and we talked a little bit about on the last slide, that it can take 1.5 years to do a partnering program. Making sure that you have conversations early with potential partners, even before you determine the full value. Making sure you know who the potential partners are for the target indication that you're working on, the target geographies you're interested in potentially partnering in. Have those conversations early. Attend the major industry conferences, whether they be Bio, LES, or JP Morgan, or some of the more scientifically focused ASCO or other therapeutic area conferences. And use the partnering booths to provide frequent updates to partners or potential partners about what the latest is with your product is important. And step number 4, telling the story and customizing to potential partner. So telling the story comes from understanding the value, making sure that you can tell the story as to how this product fits within the future market landscape, within the disease, and thinking about it from the eyes of your potential partner. How does this fit their portfolio? How does this fit their corporate strategy is important. Step number 5, thinking about the data room. Thinking about, and there's multiple vendors, including ShareVault, that provide good data rooms, and thinking about having that set up to go at any time is important. Structuring it in a way that can be easily used by potential partners important to ensure that they have a good experience when they are doing the diligence and can access the materials in a quick and appropriate way. Step number 6 is to make sure that you continue conversations with your partners on an ongoing basis, reconnect anytime you have any significant updates, clinical or IP or manufacturing or anything that is important. Make sure you use that opportunity to communicate that to potential partners on a frequent basis is important. And step number 7, I think this is important. Oftentimes when you're during partnering programs, a lot of companies will very quickly say, no, this is not an area that we're interested in, or the program isn't de-risked enough for where we would want it to be. So a no always just really means a no for now. That could change 3 months from now or a year from now, so keeping an eye on those companies in terms of what they're doing and having a conversation again doesn't hurt. It's good to be a little aggressive appropriately and have those conversations again once you have updated data. The next few slides are going to walk through our recommendations for how you would use a virtual data room. On the left-hand side here, you'll see some functionality recommendations that we recommend that companies take a look at. And on the right-hand side, we often get asked the question, how should we structure our data room? What should we be putting in it? So we walk through that in several slides. Let's look at slide 13 initially. From an access perspective, it's important to make sure that you customize access based on the stage of diligence for the particular partner. During initial stages of diligence, you may only want the partner to have access to a very small, limited number of files. And then as the companies progress through different layers of diligence, they may get access to more files. It's also possible that even within the same potential partner, there may be groups who need different levels of access. So making sure that you spend time thinking about what access you want to grant to different users and different companies, and setting the data room to be able to allow that is critical to make sure that no missteps are made. Printing. Most data rooms have the capability to print all files, print no files, or print files based on which ones you want to select. We think there should be kind of good thought paid to which files you want people to be able to print or download. We recommend that generally relatively few files are allowed to be printed or downloaded. And then in terms of some additional functionality, it's important to note that a lot of these data rooms have several features which allow you as a potential creator of the data room to see which files are being used, for how long they're being used, where are people going. So good to be able to have a view on what are people seeing, what are people spending time on, which companies are actually going to the data room versus not going to the data room. Has the IP person from your potential partner gone into the IP data file or not? Just understanding the level of activity, it can be important in understanding where those companies stand in their diligence. From a recommended structure perspective, you'll see the 8 sections that we have here that we recommend, and depending on what's important, there may be fewer or more. But generally, what we recommend is starting off with a corporate overview about the company in folder number 1, potentially. Folder number 2 is focused more on the investment opportunity, the actual product or products that you are thinking of partnering, and an overview of those. Then we recommend even from a flow of the data room perspective, a focus on commercial strategy before getting to the clinical data. What is the commercial strategy? What type of market research has been done? What is the expectation for performance for the product? Should be contained in commercial strategy. Preclinical program and clinical program should follow regulatory, IP, manufacturing. And depending on the product you have, there may be different folders that are important or less important. In some cases, some of these may not even be needed. but generally we recommend structuring the top-level tree as shown here. Now I'll spend a few more minutes to go through a few more slides that go through the parent trees in a bit more detail. So on page 14, when we are looking at the corporate overview, we believe it's important to have a discussion on the overall company and its focus, but also providing perspective on the executive team, the advisory boards, who those individuals are. Understanding the leadership and the scientific leadership can often be important in making sure that potential partners are aware of the history of those individuals and the biographies of those individuals we recommend as important. Investment overview, and you would make different layers of these open at different stages of diligence, but a non-confidential introduction deck, a confidential memorandum, and possibly even having a Q&A response section that's customized to the particular company could be stored within the data room. Moving on to the commercial strategy, on slide 15, we recommend, typically for all of these, you'll see a overview folder followed by more details. So we recommend an overview commercial folder, which may even have just a single file that talks about or has a single deck that provides an overview of the commercial strategy, followed by market research that may have been done, competitive analysis that may have been done, and any forecasting that may have been done. We typically don't recommend sharing forecasts until later in diligence, but there may be the right time to share those forecasts in terms of what you are thinking about the value. Preclinical program, overview, completed studies, ongoing studies, and planned studies. Same thing for the clinical program. What's the overall Gantt chart look like? What studies have been completed? What are ongoing? What are planned studies? For each of these, we recommend having clinical study reports, draft reports, protocols, statistical analysis plans, all embedded within these folders. The easier you can make it for a potential partner to review the materials, the better we think it is. They're going to find out all this information anyways, so it's better to make it as efficient with the potential partner as possible. Regulatory documents, and investigator's brochure, IND documents, regulatory conversations summarized and kind of sequentially placed in the folder we think is important. I jumped one slide. Slide 17, looking at the IP, the patent state granted, pending, and other legal items that may be of relevance, and then if relevant, having a perspective on manufacturing as well. So that's it for the content of the webinar. We're going to now switch over to a demo from ShareVault on the virtual data room that ShareVault has. And after that, we'll be taking questions or the question panels or the question section on the right of this webinar. And if we can't get to any questions during the course of the discussion today, we'll be taking them and be able to respond to you guys individually as well. Thank you.
Gautam, thank you very much for the very practical information you've just been sharing and for your insights into the essential steps in a successful biopharma partnering process. We're actually now compiling questions. We're starting to get some, and we'll go through this overview with ShareVault very quickly so we can get to the questions. It's not too late. If you still have some questions that you want to ask, please submit them through the question box in your GoToMeeting control panel. And while we're doing the compiling of these questions, I'm going to do a visual review of some of the key elements that Gautam discussed a few minutes ago that are specifically related to data rooms and using a ShareVault data room as an example. So I'm going to log into an empty ShareVault here. I'm going to go through the confidentiality notice. And you'll see that this is an empty data room, no files, and no due diligence structure. I'll turn off that tutorial. There's no folders and no documents yet in this environment. Gautam showed you a sample due diligence checklist. This may come from an organization like Triangle Insights. may come from the potential partner that you're dealing with. And if you have it in a spreadsheet form, and I'll just take this exact list that Gautam provided, what you want is whatever data room you use, you'd like to have a system that's efficient and you can quickly get the information in place and organized in a structure that's the recommended structure like the one he just specified. So I'm going to actually create a folder structure here in ShareVault just by copying the due diligence checklist that I have in a spreadsheet. Again, this is the Triangle Insights one that we have. And when I just create that, it's asking me, do I want to create the folders from that? And it is now going through and creating that exact folder structure that Gautam just outlined. And if I expand the folder structure, here are all of the 8 categories that were the top level categories that he recommended as the starting point. And in fact, you'll see here are all of the subcategories, and they already exist in this data room. I'm now going to switch to another data room that is equivalent to this because I don't want to spend the time uploading files here, but I'm going to switch to another data room that has that same structure already in place and show you a few other elements that address specifically topics that Gautam talked about. Again, kill this. What you'll see here is now, here's the same project Cellris tag structure with documents in it. And one of the things I wanted to show you is about the controlled access that Gautam mentioned. This is where you control who the groups are. In this example, we've got a large pharma 1, large pharma 2. We've even got a private equity organization in here. And one of the nice things about having a data room is you can actually set it up to stage disclosure. It's easier to do than in a lot of other systems. Using a data room to actually help you stage the unfolding of information. Here I've got in this stage 1 disclosure. So this is not a group. This is just essentially a template where I'm looking at the folder structure. And here's the Project Cellris folder structure. And I'm saying I'm going to give them that corporate overview. They can do whatever they want with it. It will have that watermark. Gautam talked about having a watermark visible. It will have the watermark visible. And then I'm going to show them the preclinical program, and I'm going to show them some of the intellectual property information. I'm going to show them the patent estate and the granted patents, but that's all I'm going to show them in stage 1. And the nice thing about that is if I go to large pharma 1 here, and I say under this project, what do I want to start with? I'm just going to say, let's start with the stage 1 template, and that's what they're going to go see. Then as the discussions progress, you can now go look at the stage 2 policies and include those as well and enable those. So now for stage 2 disclosure, if you switch to that, I'll show you the difference here, and that is now there's that same corporate overview. Now there's the preclinical program, and you get to see all of that still protected. You also get to start to see some of the clinical program. Maybe that's what you're sharing next. You may be sharing more of the intellectual property, including pending patents or other aspects related to intellectual property. But this is a nice way where you can just unfold the information very simply and very easily from organization to organization. And each organization has their own permissions, so you can do these separately. Large Pharma 1 may already be in a stage 2 disclosure, whereas Large Pharma 2 is actually still at the beginning of the process. The final thing I want to just quickly cover is the reports. Again, this is something that Gautam covered in his activity list. Let's say Large Pharma 1, you're tracking them and you want to know what the activity has been. I'm going to select here Large Pharma 1, and I'm going to see, I could look at a variety of different activities, but I really just want to see the viewing and maybe the downloading activity for Large Pharma 1. And I'm just going to look at it for today. Here's the activity for today. And for example, here was a document that was viewed, the Acme promotion document. It's 1 page, and they spent 1 minute viewing this document. Here's a different document, a preclinical document. Again, it was very quick, but they actually looked at 5 of the 10 pages, and you know which pages they looked at. It's that kind of information that's particularly useful, as Gautam outlined. Okay, now we're ready for the Q&A. So let me go back here to the slide deck. If you have any questions still, please feel free to submit them. If we don't get to all of the questions before the end of the session, we will be sharing the questions with Gautam, and he will be in touch with you directly. Okay, Gautam, the first question is, how can TPP be defined prior to the FIH study? Often the exact indications are not known that early.
Yeah, that's a fair question, and it does depend upon whether you know which indications it's going after or not. And in cases, so let's kind of think about if you do know which indications it may be pursuing, then we think, of course, it is easier to think about what the target product profile is. If it is a pre-first-in-human and there are a range of possible indications you want to go after, we recommend thinking about what those range of indications are, and even having some type of commercial thinking in terms of which one of those indications do we think there could be value to have a new novel product, and what would it take to succeed within that particular indication. So in that case, what we would recommend is not necessarily a target product profile for what your product may provide, but having some perspective on what already exists and thinking about what it could possibly take to improve on what already is within the market. So thinking about the range of indications and iterating on what would need to be proven by your product to succeed is important.
Another question, what are specific sources for benchmark deal share values?
Yeah, so for that, there are no publicly available clean data points in terms of overall deal value. What we recommend to companies from a public perspective is we recommend taking a look at other products that have been partnered at different stages and taking a look at what has been publicly disclosed for those products. Typically, you will get disclosures on at least two fronts. One is an upfront, and you may get disclosures in terms of kind of the mega blockbuster type values in terms of if everything is realized, here's the milestones that could be realized, and it's double-digit royalties. So some of that data does provide guidance. But in addition to that, generally speaking, kind of using very high-level numbers, if you have a product in phase 3, you are looking at anywhere between 35 to 50% of the value, overall value, should be realized by you. If you are somewhere in phase 2, the value that you can realize may be somewhere in the 25 to 40% range. So there are estimates, but it really does depend upon the therapeutic area, the indication, the level of de-risking, a lot of other factors that need to be considered. But unfortunately, there are not great data sources that give, here's the value.
How detailed should clinical data be for a data room? And specifically, there's some examples given: SAS data sets, raw data for reanalysis.
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I think ultimately the raw SAS reports may need to be there for the latest stages of diligence, but are probably not required for the initial stages of diligence. For the initial stages of diligence, you probably want the main draft of the clinical study report. That the detailed appendix tables may not need to be there, but some of this is also handled with Q&A. Some companies may want to take a look at those detailed reports or particular tables, and you may need to provide them. But here's where kind of cost can become important as well, because and I actually don't know how Sharewall charges, but I know some companies charge on a per-page basis. So you may want to not initially include them, especially for large studies. There can be a lot of SAS pages that have been created, but as needed, you may want to be able to load them. But we don't think they're generally required to start off with.
Another question, what are the typical risk adjustments you would use for phases 1, 2, and 3?
Yeah, so the answer really does depend upon the therapeutic area you're within. The two sources that are public or kind of academic literature sources that we recommend these days are Dimasi had published papers on typical risk rates based on large pharma research. The data, he's published kind of a couple of different reports on this, one I believe in the early 2000s and one more recently in the last 2 years. So we recommend using that. But in addition to that, and I think more powerful and now being used more often is Biomed Tracker. Biomed Tracker recently published in the last year and a half a resource that provides perspective on probabilities of success by phase. And they had a more robust look at all companies, not just large pharma companies. So we recommend looking at those two sources to have a perspective.
I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. One question, there's one short one and one long one. I'll start with the short one. What is a patent estate?
Patent estate, by that I meant patents that have been granted or the overall perspective in terms of what patents the company may be going after.
And the longer question...
So I probably messed that up, but that's my perspective on it. Go ahead.
If the product is for an unmet need with no approved products for TRX modeling, what suggestions do you have for pressure testing revenue projections based solely on EPI data, using sales of related products as surrogate, for example?
Yeah, no, so that's tough, but I think the things that would need to be considered there would be, you start off with EPI, how many people have this disease that may have no effective treatment options. Next, you may be able to take a look at claims data. And this is not necessarily easy to get to, but there are even public sources that capture what codes have been reported by physicians when the patient shows up. So even if there's no therapeutic options, you may be able to get data on how often was a patient diagnosed with a particular disease. You can get that with public sources, and then there are more IMS or Waters Kluwer Symphony Health approaches of doing that as well. So we think that's probably where I would recommend starting. But in addition to that, as mentioned, looking at analog diseases and thinking about if 200,000 patients have the disease, we feel 50,000 of the patients within that disease are being treated with products like similar to or the same type of mindset as this, then we think the treatment rate could be 25%. Using that type of math in your product could be useful.
There are a few other questions that we won't be able to get to today. I apologize for that, but as I mentioned, we will be sharing those questions, all of the questions, with Gautam, and he can respond individually. Gautam, I'd like to thank you again for presenting today and for the very practical information you've provided. I'd also like to thank our audience for your attention and invite you to come to ShareVault's website for the schedule on future webinars, but also for seeing recordings of previous webinars and seeing some white papers related to those webinars. And those are both webinars and white papers related to partnering, valuation, and negotiating all around the biopharma partnering process. As a quick reminder before we close, and there were a couple of questions around this, a recording of the webinar will be made available on our website in about a week. And today's attendees will also receive an email on how to get copies of Gautam's slides. So yes, for those of you that asked about the slides, you will be able to get copies of them. And so on behalf of ShareVault and Triangle Insights and our co-sponsors, LES and Bio, I'd like to wish everyone a very good rest of the day, and we very much appreciate your attendance and audience. And Gautam, thank you again.
Thank you, and thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.